To Macon County, to Tuskegee, to the doctors who have been wrongly associated with the events there, you have our apology as well. To our African American citizens, I am sorry that your federal government orchestrated a study so clearly racist.
U.S. syphilis study called unjustified.
Syphilis study went
for
on
40 syphilis
years.
experiment termed unjustified.
immoral.
The disease wasn't
Inhumane
treated. A violation
experiment.
of human dignity.
A blot
Racist
at
on
least
humanity.
28 died
An
in syphilis
experiment
study.
regulation
lives.
urged in human testing.
They helped men die.
The blood of African Americans runs deep throughout American history, yet their contributions to the emerging American nation were overshadowed by the brutal racism and exploitation they were forced to endure. In the waning months of the Civil War, African Americans were promised 40 acres and a mule and finally had their gaze on the fabled freedom and prosperity of the American dream. However, their triumph was short-lived, as numerous state and federal laws aimed to curb the opportunities which African American citizens could take advantage of. Supported by Supreme Court decisions such as the Plessy v. Ferguson case of 1896, African Americans were once again cast into a pit of second-class citizenship. The poverty and unsanitary conditions in which many African Americans found themselves in led to epidemics of disease such as syphilis. The combination of these factors created the perfect conditions for the U.S. Public Health Service's Venereal Disease Division to take advantage of a marginalized and vulnerable community. In the eyes of the USPHS, the tragic circumstances of African Americans proved to be an opportunity to triumph with new scientific findings. With publications such as the Flexner Report of 1910 still fresh in mind of the medical community, ethnic minorities such as the Negro male were left with a diminished status and little inherent values in the eyes of the white-dominated society. Ethical and medical tragedies such as the 1902 U.S. Army study of cholera in the Philippines, during which American doctors intentionally exposed native Filipinos to deadly strains of cholera, foreshadowed the disregard with which human test subjects were handled during the Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. The U.S. Public Health Service's heinous views of minorities in the first half of the 20th century resulted in a humanitarian and medical tragedy during the Tuskegee syphilis study, as scientific advancements were placed above human lives. The resulting deaths would ironically prove to be a solemn triumph, as the backlash from the public and medical community led to an evolution of bioethics. The tragedy known as the Tuskegee syphilis experiment was originally envisioned to be a short, demonstrative study to secure funding for syphilis treatment programs in Macon County, Alabama, during a period of drastic economic reversal. In the 1930s, as the full extent of the Great Depression on the American economy was becoming evident, the U.S. Public Health Service began to shut down its numerous programs. However, the Tuskegee doctors were able to salvage the project by altering their focus from treatment to observation of long-term effects of untreated syphilis. As Dr. Talia Farrow Clark, head of the Venereal Disease Division at the U.S. Public Health Service, described it, Macon County presented to be the ideal state of the 6-month study.
Macon County is a natural laboratory, a ready-made situation. The rather low intelligence of the Negro population, depressed economic conditions, and the very common promiscuous sex relations not only contribute to the spread of syphilis, but also to the prevailing indifference with regard to treatment.
Planned in collaboration with the historically African-American Tuskegee University, the study would be drawn out into a 40-year-long deception. A total of 600 poor African-American men from Macon County, 399 of which were already infected by the disease, were recruited under the premise of free healthcare, free meals, and burial insurance. With the notion of informed consent not yet the norm in the medical field, U.S. government doctors deliberately misinformed and distracted the Tuskegee patients during the study explanations. One survivor of the study, Charles Pollard, recalled how the institute withheld the syphilis information and instead used a broad term, bad blood.
I never heard no such thing. All I knew was that they just kept saying I had the bad blood. They never mentioned syphilis to me, not even once.
The orchestrators of the study utilized African-American personnel such as nurse Eunice Rivers to maintain personal contact with patients. A community plagued by syphilis and starved of medical treatment leapt at the opportunity to receive care and attention they could not afford.
These people would come down here and they get all kinds of extra things, cardiograms, and some things I've never heard of. This is the thing that really hurt me about all the unfair publicity. These people had been given better medical care than some of us who could afford it.
Blinded to the devastating effects of the study on the human subjects by their seemingly noble intentions, the Tuskegee University and the U.S. Public Health Service's Venereal Disease Division carried on with the research, which would eventually spiral out into an ethical tragedy as the doctors' curiosity triumphed over their concern for the safety of their test subjects. At the conclusion of the study, the blood of 128 men would stain the hands of its orchestrators. Although by 1947, penicillin was proven to be an effective treatment for syphilis and was readily available, the study's leadership intentionally decided to withhold the administration of treatment to the study group and chose to continue the research. As the number of serious concerns regarding this study continued to grow, members of the medical field began to question the ethical implications behind it. In one of the first recorded objections to the project, a young physician named Erwin Schatz would write a letter to the U.S. Public Health Service fiercely condemning their violation of human rights.
I'm utterly astounded by the fact that physicians allow patients with a potentially fatal disease to remain untreated when effective therapy is available. I assume you feel that the information which is extracted from observation of this untreated group is worth their sacrifice. The United States Public Health Service need to reevaluate their moral judgment in this regard.
The fires of Schatz's letter would soon evolve into the embers that would fuel Public Health Service employee Peter Buxton into revealing the details of the study to the Washington Star newspaper. This led up to the July 25, 1972 Associated Press article by Jean Heller, which became the pivotal disclosure of the tragedy. Public condemnation of the study was instantaneous while the Congressional Advisory Panel ruled the study as ethically unjustified, thereby ending the Tuskegee tragedy. Attorney Fred Gray would then file a class action suit on the behalf of the study's subjects against the Public Health Service in 1973. He was able to achieve a successful settlement in the form of $9 million paid out as compensation to the 72 of the surviving test subjects. As the awareness of the failures within the Tuskegee study began to rise, the notion of bioethics became prevalent across the medical field. The 1979 Belmont Report proved to be the foundation of the framework for assessing and regulating human subject research and standard patient care. Combined with the 1964 Declaration of Helsinki and the earlier Nuremberg Code of 1947, the fallout of the Tuskegee syphilis experiment solidified bioethics as a professional discipline. In what can be seen as a reflection of moral wrongdoing, the medical community sought to never allow such a blatant act of ethical exploitation from ever happening again. To accomplish this, they popularized the usage of institutional review boards, internal committees within research institutions,
established and authorized to protect human subjects who are recruited to participate in research protocols, and to ensure that research protocols are ethically sound in their design.
Informed consent presented another evolution in medical research as researchers were pushed to constantly communicate with the human subjects. As Dr. Brown of Washington University in St. Louis states,
"For consent to be truly informed, the research participant or the patient must have decisional capacity sufficient to understand the relevant medical information, including risks, burdens, benefits, alternatives, and to make a considered decision free of coercion. Research participants and patients all have an absolute right to refuse any intervention."
The 1990 Patient Self-Determination Act culminated the triumph for the medical field by finalizing their transition towards a standard of proper medical conduct that is just and ethical, as the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations mandated institutions to have a process for addressing ethical conflicts as an accrediting standard. In spite of the 4 decades of tragic deception in Macon County, Alabama, the Tuskegee syphilis study ended in a solemn triumph as it ushered a new era of bioethics. The human sacrifices forced the medical community to embrace the blood-stained past and push forward to a future in where the marginalized are not tragically taken advantage of for the sake of scientific advancement, but are instead protected for the sake of human dignity and triumph.
That can never be allowed to happen again. It is against everything our country stands for, and what we must stand against is what it was.